Good morning and welcome to the Ask Weldon Show, episode 219. Today, I finally got the clickbait question, how to get better at Fortnite, and that is the topic of the show. Also, we have two other great questions to lead into that. This is the Ask Weldon Show, and I am Weldon, a sports psychology trainer with a master's in sport and exercise psychology. Although for the last 6 years, I've been working towards and working in esport psychology. So focusing on high performance and average performance also in video games and with esport athletes. And in this show, you call in your questions. You can call them in using the app Anchor, the anchor.fm/Weldon Green. So if you go into the Anchor app, you search Weldon Green, which is my name, then you will find my profile and you can click plus message and call in your audio. And trust me when I say that it sounds really cool. They treat the audio in some sort of way, both for their podcasts and for their call-ins. So it lets you have this rather nice radio-sounding voice that comes out of your phone microphone. Doesn't sound bad at all. Sounds more like an expensive microphone. So I do recommend it if you ever wanted to sound cool while asking a question on the show. And then I play them here and I answer them. We handle a couple questions every day. So you can call in your questions. You can also, if you want to refine your questions or you want to get a little more detailed, just come to the live filming of the show, twitch.tv/mindgamesweldon. Every day, 6:30 p.m. LA time, because before and after recording the show, we really get into it and in depth with a number of different questions where you can do follow-ups and you can really type things out in a way that will make it very clear. Also, if you have some sort of anxiety about getting your voice on audio, that is the appropriate channel to take it to. All right, that's all the announcements. Why don't we jump into the show? Okay, the first question is from John, and I'm taking this, you'll see why I'm taking it after I start answering it, but once again, this question deals with abnormal psychology, and I want to caveat by saying that I do not have a license for psychologist, okay? That's not what sports psychology is. There are several tracks into sports psychology. You can take the track of coming from the clinical side of psychology, and you can study sport and high performance. Most of those people will become practitioners that are kind of like, they do a lot of one-on-ones with athletes, they do a lot of psychotherapy techniques and things like that. And then there's the sports track where you kind of come from the sporting world and you move towards the psychological aspects of the game. So you study, like I did, for example, a master's in sports psychology and exercise psychology, but my background was in sport. And so I don't come from the clinical side, and a lot of the work I do is I'll be coaching a team, or I will do one-on-ones, of course, but you aren't licensed when you come in through sports psychology through sport. It's not like I can deal with clinical cases. We're trained in them in order to identify them so that we can then refer them to a abnormal psychologist. And so this question is about attachment anxiety, which is both a theoretical idea, right? That there's this thing called attachment anxiety, and people know about it and they talk about it. And it's also something you can get treated for using psychotherapy. And so the thing that I'm going to be talking about today is the concept of attachment anxiety, not the clinical abnormal psychology issue of you having attachment anxiety. And the reason I'm taking the question is because I think that I can delineate that line clearly, and I want you guys to understand that. All right, so let's jump into the question from John.
Hey Weldon, I wanted to ask you about attachment anxiety. In real life, this could manifest as an irrational fear that your significant other will leave you for someone better, or that your job will lay you off for someone younger and cheaper for the company. In the world of esports, it could be that you worry that your team will kick you for someone that plays your role better, or that they feel has better team communication. Is a certain level of attachment anxiety normal? And do you have any tips or advice for feeling less anxious about losing something that you care about? Thanks.
All right. So is it normal, and are there tips for feeling less anxious about losing something you care about? I would assume that it's normal. I think the things that you're describing are pretty standard. I think that anxiety is always a question of homeostasis. We know that a certain amount of stress promotes growth. We know that from, in terms of like the actual physical manifestation within our body of like muscle, lifting. Like when you create stress, you create growth. But now there are theories in psychology such as stress-related growth, SRG, and trauma-related growth, which has to do with how it is that these moments in our lives that push us towards a higher anxiety promote and create and development within the mind and within our personalities. So I have noticed also that relaxation is kind of doesn't really necessarily make your life better or push you towards development. That people who have everything kind of like settled and they've relaxed into it, they might not even be happy, at least not long term. So I think a certain amount of growth of anxiety kind of right in the middle is like a good way of seeing. If you're an anxious person already, it's a good way of seeing your life as you don't want to get too anxious and you don't want to get not anxious, because right in the middle there is a happy medium of homeostasis where you are growing and you're forcing yourself to grow and to develop. And the important thing is to be able to cope with it and grow in a healthy way, which is, by the way, one of the things that I'm working on in my life and which I promote in the MAC program, this idea of being mindful and accepting as a way of coping and dealing with anxiety. And so the second question, do you have any tips is it normal? I would assume so. Any tips for how to deal with feeling less anxious about like getting replaced or these kinds of attachments? I mean, I think for me, I deal with it using a variety of thought stoppage techniques. So the way that your brain carries on the argument is kind of the problem. I would say that the first initial idea of, oh, I'm afraid of this thing is good to recognize, right? You want to be mindful enough to recognize, I'm having this existential fear about losing this thing or losing this position or losing this place. And then the next thing that happens is a pattern that you programmed already in your brain of like continuing on the argument and being like, oh, what if, and you're thinking about it. So there's two things you need to do. One, you need to stop carrying on the thought, okay? And for that, you need to get really good at focusing on the present and getting yourself out of the past and the future. And the second thing you need to do is creating a sort of rational argument that is counter to that lines with your philosophy. So my philosophy is, in terms of relationships, you could do something like there's many fish in the sea, so there's no such thing as a soulmate, and that gets you out of the idea of like, oh, you're going to be losing something that's essential to your existence. Rather, there's just a relationship you've invested time in, and it falls apart, so you go build another one. You could have a mantra like I have about groups and performance, where if I'm not good enough and I get cut from something, that the idea is I will be so good they can't ignore me, and I will like strive to get better at something so that I can get another opportunity. If there's an opportunity like a door opening and you think, oh, should I take it or not take it? Oh my gosh, I don't want to miss this chance. I use a mantra and a series of rational thoughts. Like if I was good enough to get this door to open in the first place, it's highly unlikely that it's a lottery. It's not like you win the lottery in life and you get this random door that opens and it's an opportunity that nobody else would ever have and that you're never going to see again. That's not how it works. The probability of that happening statistically so low. So what's more likely is that this is the level of development you're at, and this door opened because you kind of are good enough and you created the opportunity yourself. So it will come again. So just chill out and wait for the best opportunity. So the initial thought is going to come up, right? The initial idea, and that's, I think, the fine part. You shouldn't try to avoid that or suppress it or try to train it out of you. It's not going to happen, first of all, because if you're an anxious person and you're anxious about these attachments, it's just going to happen. So you need to get really good at stopping those thoughts, like recognizing when they're continuing on into this cyclical way, just being like, no, stop. Maybe a breathing, meditation, focusing on the present, doing visualizations, whatever, and then come up with that specific situation, come up with an argument against it that aligns with your philosophy, that it gives you hope and action, right? That gives you something to believe and something to do, something to hope for, and that makes sense to you and that you can like push forward on, makes you a better person, right? And that pattern of thought, if you just act on it and think it every time, will then lead to habits, to behaviors. So that's what I recommend. All right, good question, John. And I really like the way that you put it. It was really succinct, but had incredibly clear-cut questions at the end. So take notes, everybody. And let's go into James's question, which is the opposite. Very, very long. But, okay, opposite in a good way, right? Very long, but also presenting a very strong idea that I think a lot of people are not brave enough as this next questioner, James, who's going to ask this question. So pay attention to the bravery that comes and the vulnerability that comes with asking a question like this, because it's true. Everybody has these thoughts, but nobody wants to admit them.
Hi, Weldon, it's James. I was just wondering if you have any advice for how to become less judgmental and how to break down potentially offensive stereotypes you might have of people when you're not exposed to it all the time. And I think...
So James could have stopped the question right there, just FYI. But instead, he carried along and tried to give an example. That's the brave part.
Exposure is probably one of the answers here, but I'm thinking, for instance, I go to a good university. I'm from quite an upper class background. How do I get rid of this horrible idea in my head that, quote, lower class people are, not as good as me or not as valuable as me in some way? I find that, obviously the view is quite, repugnant, but I find it's brought out of me and kind of confirmed when I'm in a bad mood and there's some trigger. For example, if someone with quite poor education was talking really loudly and annoyingly in a public space, I feel like that would confirm my bias.
All right, it actually continues. One sec.
Just finishing my last message. So I know these views are, not nice, obviously, and that's why I would want to get rid of them. I don't act on them or anything, but, I would like for my head not to associate bad things with good people, just unfairly, especially when I'm in a bad mood and I feel like it's very easy to become defensive or hypercritical of other people. Yeah, thank you.
All right, James, thanks for the question and for the example. And everybody take a moment to recognize that we naturally stereotype people and that we do have these judgmental thoughts. Yeah. So first of all, I think that there's a couple important things in this question. One is, how do we stop this on the systemic level? How do you stop a judgment? And how do you stop stereotyping? And two, how do you stop the guilt associated with doing this? Okay, these, I think, are two different things. And I want to deal with both of them. The first thing I want to deal with is the guilt of doing this. First of all, our brain is wired up for stereotyping. The way that we think is, there's many systems in the brain that are very subconscious. For example, athleticism. If you're learning soccer, it's not like you actually learn soccer. You train a subconscious instrument to deploy soccer for you. Okay, it's not like you learn language, right? Language is subconscious. You just embed it into your head statistically. It's not like you learn to avoid, red berries. It's just something that's kind of there because, our ancestors were eating all of these red berries, and your mother is always slapping your hand every single time you reach for a red berry randomly when you're out walking and you're like a 3-year-old, and you see a berry on a bush. And your mom was like, don't eat that, it's poisonous. So you have the way that we handle the massive amounts of data that we are incorporating into our brain is by creating patterns. Okay, patterns of how to kick the soccer ball, patterns of what color of berries to eat, patterns of, what was the other example I gave? I forget now, but whatever, the second example that I gave. So a language, patterns of language for communication. So it's quite natural for our brain to associate and to stereotype. And we know this from both observation and from research. The question then is, or one of the elements to getting past that is accepting that and getting away from the guilt. So instead of thinking of yourself as like a bad person, right, think of it as in terms of, okay, this is a natural thing, but it's not something that I want to do. I want to elevate myself. I want to develop, but you can't hold yourself down and incriminate yourself along the way. So you have to be compassionate also towards yourself on a daily basis. There's a great quote from, let's see if I can find it actually, 1 second. There's a great quote from Thich Nhat Hanh. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he's a Vietnamese Buddhist scholar. And he talks about how on a daily basis, you need to kind of get into your mind and forgive yourself. Here it is. Take good care of yourself. So how to deal with the suffering and the acceptance of like your mind doing annoying things, bad things, like focusing on bad things about yourself. To take good care of ourselves, we must go back and take care of the wounded child inside of us. You have to practice going back to your wounded child every day. You have to embrace him or her tenderly like a big brother or big sister. You have to talk to him, talk to her. You can write a letter to the child in you of 2 or 3 pages. To that, you recognize his or her presence and will do everything you can to heal his or her wounds. So dealing with acceptance of who you are and the thoughts that you have, and the problems that you have and the possibilities you have, I think is like a daily thing. If you do that, it will enable you to do the next step easier. And the next step, I believe, is about compassion, right? So James, to delete stereotypes, I think for me, the best thing that has worked is to see everybody individually, is to see people as individual people. And so when I see somebody acting out, right, you have a thought, and if you listen to the first question of this show very carefully, you'll see that I'm going to say the same pattern here. You have an initial thought. That's the one you have to not feel guilty over, and you have to recognize. You have to see it and notice it. Then you have the thought pattern that comes from that, right? So you have the emotion and then the rationalization. That's the thing that you want to tackle. Is not necessarily the trigger at the moment when you have the thought. It's the rationalization afterwards. So then you say, for example, okay, I'm annoyed by this person. Okay, so I'll use an example of walking through downtown Uvascula, and there's like a gypsy begging on the street and maybe playing an instrument, maybe not. And my thought is, there's social services. Why are you here begging, right? And then the rationalization would be like, okay, this is not right. This is not a class of people. This is a person, and you can, for example, try to visualize that person's life, like what it might have been like up to then. You can try to imagine, that they have what a relationship might look like for that person. You can think like, okay, they have a mother and they have a father. Maybe they have a child. If you've never had a child, then you can visualize that they've had a mother and a father, and when they were little, and the things they might have done and played with, with their parents, or maybe not. If they're an orphan, so you can associate and identify with the human elements of like their life and your life. You can do these like various different techniques to kind of see them through the lens of like individuality rather than grouping. And this is the thing that you can do to essentially separate because what your brain wants to do is statistically put another data point into a stereotype so that it can understand the world. And what you want to do is take them out of the group and make them as an individual person and hold compassion towards them. So basically anything that you can do to bring them out of the group and to visualize or conceptualize them as a person, and with wants and needs and desires and problems also, will help you to disassociate the things that they're doing from a class of people or a group of people, and also cut down on judgmental thoughts at the same time. So that is what I recommend, is mental exercises in seeing people as individual people and compassion. And you can do these in fantasy. So you can like do them inside your head. You can also do them in real life where you ask That's the like leveled up version where you go up and you just talk to a person, and you ask these inquiring thoughts about them and try to learn about them in that way. Yeah, and of course the other thing you said, exposure, which is probably helpful for the group, like the group definitions you were talking about, where you actually change the stereotypes in your head. But I think that that's like you said, it's a long-term, difficult effort that involves exposing yourself to a lot of data points that will then change your subconscious to, which of course you should do, right? You should work on this. It will change your subconscious to like have a different stereotype about a certain kind of people, of how they look, or certain people who look a certain way or sound a certain way or live a certain way. But then on the other hand, if you don't want to work on the stereotype, or if you don't have time to work on the stereotype, or if that's a long-term thing, right? It's going to take years. You want to deal with this today. It's like moving the person out of being stereotyped and seeing them as an individual right there in that moment. And that is like a mental exercise, I would say. Okay. Thank you for that question. I think that I answered it the way I wanted to. But if anything is unclear, stop by the Twitch stream and let's talk about it. Last question of the day, you guys. How do we get better at Fortnite?
Hey Weldon, it's Didio, and my question is about how to get good at a video game, in this case Fortnite, and it's a good title for your video. So, there are a lot of aspects to practicing Fortnite, such as building, aiming, pick shooting, and I have to mix everything into my gameplay. So should I just practice one aspect alone, then mix it into my gameplay, or should I just practice everything together and they will be naturally mixed into my gameplay? And also, if I practice one aspect alone and then mix it into my gameplay, how long should I wait to do it? How long should I wait to mix, to say, okay, let's mix this aspect into my gameplay. Let's play normal, but using this new technique that I learned. Like 3 days or a week, or I have to feel that I'm good enough in this aspect to mix it into my gameplay. And how should I decide what to practice first and last? Thanks, Weldon.
Okay. 3 big questions. Do I focus on one thing or do I focus on everything? So do I focus on like a specific kind of skill and narrow down and drill my practice on that, or do I try to focus on like everything like equally, right? If I focus on one thing, how long do I wait before I incorporate it, and how do I determine which things to focus on first? So let's answer the first question first. Yes, focus on a single thing. This is the equivalent of one tricking in League of Legends. You focus on a single element of the game and you aim for perfection in it, and you handicap yourself in other elements in order to focus on that. For example, if you want to focus on building and specifically speed and like outthinking people, then you're like, I'm only going to go for trap kills. So first you land and you kill whoever's around and you get enough traps to actually do this. And then when you run into people, you build yourself safely and you build towards them, and then you build them into a box and then you throw a trap inside, right? And if you don't have traps, you build them into a box and then you unbox them and kill them, or you fight and you die, whatever. But the idea is the first thing that you have to do is always box somebody in, which means that you have to get to them without dying or taking damage, and then you have to like box them in, which means you have to be better at building than them and faster, and you have to outthink them. And so that would be like an example of technique, right? Or you can say you're going to only kill people with a certain weapon, right? Like only just snipers, and you just focus only on snipers, and you focus on not taking damage, and your peeking and your speed and your time in your scope. So you drop it way down so that you're never, scoped in. Or you only play with the hunter's rifle, right? And unscoped. And so there's all of these one trick things, and that is the way that you should learn. You should focus on a very, very specific part of the game, and you should focus on that element to complete mastery, and you should twist and warp the game around the practice of that to enhance the challenge level and the difficulty, and to put yourself in situations that might only come up 1 in 5 games, 1 in 10 games, but you accelerate the process by making it come up every single game multiple times. Okay, that is the best way to deal with these kind of environments where you can't do drills, but you just have to like work at it in like an exhibition match in real life. Okay, so second question is, how long till you incorporate them into your gameplay? The answer is never. They become your gameplay. So there is no like, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to carry it over here and stop doing that. You just simply turn the drill off, and then the incorporation is happening as you're playing. Okay. So what you're asking is, when do I stop doing the drill? And the answer is never. You just move on to the next drill. And then that becomes not your focus anymore. You just kind of have the latent skill, and it just happens in the game automatically. So there is no active incorporation of it. It should be happening as you're training. And it's not like, okay, it's ready, now I'm going to install it and press start. No, that's not how the brain works. The brain works by consistently, like you have a skill at building a wall in response to getting shot from behind. And it probably sucks. And then it gets slightly better when you focus on it. And then it gets better, and then it gets better, and then it's better. It's not like you're like, okay, I'm going to learn how to build wall. Okay, now I'm going to go into my gameplay and I'm going to deinstall the bad spinning around and building a wall, and I'm going to install my new version. It's just like, it just incorporates. So there is none of this like conscious incorporation of the gameplay. When you're stopping the drill, you just simply decide that you're good enough and you move on to the next drill. Or you decide that it's suitable, or you get bored of the drill, or whatever may have you, okay? And then the final question, the more interesting one, is what order do I do this in? And that is really the answer, right? So this is really the question. This is the question that if you do the right order, you will climb, and if you do the wrong order, you will not climb. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, okay? So, oh wait, there's no ladder in Fortnite. So I guess it's not about climbing, it's more about consistent winning. So you will win more consistently, and if you do the wrong one, you will win less consistently. Let's put it that way. But you have to make sure that you, first of all, that you realize that there is no necessarily wrong way. So you might win less consistently because you're focusing on the quote-unquote wrong stuff. But really what you're doing is you're just, building up a set of skills that is useful for the game, but not useful for winning necessarily yet. You have to combine stuff together in order to kind of cover that gap. Or you might focus on skills that are conducive to winning right off the bat, but you'll have tons of holes in your gameplay that are vulnerabilities that people could abuse, but that like don't normally happen in like a standard game, or prevent you from winning in that way. So I think it's a little bit irrelevant what order you pick it on, because I think that a good coach will be able to give you the very next skill that you need to kind of feel like you're getting better at the game, to feel the impact in your gameplay, because that's the most motivating, right? But we don't have that knowledge of Fortnite yet. These kinds of things are not known except in games that are completely solved, like chess or violin playing, or soccer training. Now that we're getting a handle on why it is that Brazil has so successfully created masters of this craft, like there's been studies of the way that they bring up soccer players and what happens over there. So like we're not going to know that for Fortnite. We don't know that for Fortnite. So what is the answer? The answer is you have to pick the most motivating thing. Motivation is the key instigator to learning in the brain. It's the number one thing that you're going to need to like manifest mastery of a skill. And so you have to pick the absolutely most motivating thing. So you see, you're like, I want to do that. I want to be that god there who's doing that thing. So you pick that as your skill, and then you stick with it. It has to be so motivating that you stick with it until you hit that mastery point where you go to the next drill. Okay? So I would say that is how you choose your next thing, is you look and you say, what would be the most fun for me? And then you do that. All right, that's how you get better at Fortnite, guys. Thank you very much for the show today, and make sure to check out my training program. I forgot to advertise this after the second question, so I'll do it here at the end of the show, but I have a training program called Mindfulness Acceptance Commitment Training Program, which is a online video training course. Just 47 videos online, organized in a course-like structure, 7 modules over 7 weeks, so there's 7 videos per module. You're supposed to do 1 per day. Each module is a lecture plus a meditation training. So mindfulness training for mindfulness-based performance enhancement. So it's for performance enhancement, whether that is a video game, a sport, or a workplace, business leadership, or a relationship, or public speaking. Like, that's up to you. But essentially, the elements that are composed of high performance here are awareness, so the mindfulness aspect, acceptance, which we talked a lot about in the second question of today, and commitment. Mindfulness, acceptance, commitment. There we go. That's the correct order with my hands there. Which is the actual part that you can observe in the real world, right? The discipline, the act of actually doing it. How do you get to that point of crossing the barrier that is preventing you from taking action? Whether it's you're doing the wrong thing or you're not doing anything at all. This is the program that I invented and did in order to try to hit the masses, because I basically priced myself out of working with amateur athletes in terms of time available in my day plus price range. And so this is the thing that I'm trying to do to spread that out so that people can get this Twitch experience, but in a training way that is targeted toward their life, without needing to have a phone call with me. So check it out, mindgames.gg/MAC. And you should use the code AskWeldon, because that will give you a discount, and it will say, hi, I came from YouTube, which is mainly why I have that code. It takes it down from $30 to $25 to highly incentivize you to use it so that I can track, where people hear about my program from. So make sure to check that out. Thank you for your attention today, and I will see you Twitch in a couple seconds, and I'll see the rest of you tomorrow.